What is up, everyone? Today we're going to talk through whether or not the CEO of PSA is getting special treatment with his own submissions. Something pretty interesting happened in the last few days, and I think it's all worth talking through right now. I'll share my thoughts, I'll explain the situation first, but then I'll also talk through my own conversation that I had with Nat Turner earlier today to give his context on the situation as at hand right now. Now, this first came to my attention through this cardboard life on Instagram. I believe he had seen it on Twitter, but he'd also seen that Retro Hoops had done a video on YouTube. I hadn't seen Retro Hoops' video prior to this post, but I have seen it now, and it is pretty interesting. What has essentially occurred is that Nat Turner had this card graded right here and basically did a photo dump of all his recent submissions on Twitter. Now, this was part of that, and because it got a PSA 10, people were obviously quite interested. They zoomed in on the cards, and then they got to like this section of the card and found themselves in a pretty interesting situation. Now, the reason why people paid close attention to this card in the first place was because it's die cut, right? And most collectors, or all collectors, should know that die cut cards are really difficult to get good grades in. Anything more than a 6 or 7 sometimes is very hard to do, just because instead of a card having normal 4 edges and 4 corners, they've now got all these additional edges and corners that need to be factored into the final grade. So the fact it's got a 10 raised a few eyebrows, right? And then people zoomed into this section of the card and they saw something pretty funny. You can see here, this card doesn't really match, or this portion of the card, sorry, doesn't match anything else within the card. Now, to give you some context, the Cardboard Life has done a comparison to what this card should look like, and as you can see, there is a distinct piece missing. Now, this is pretty interesting for a few reasons. Now, so many people were quick to say, okay, Nat Turner, the CEO, is getting special treatment because he's submitting his own cards, and the graders are too scared to tell him no. They're too scared to tell him that your card sucks. The reason why this is interesting is, per my conversation with Nat Turner earlier today, this card in question was actually in a BGS 9.5 slab prior to getting cracked and submitted to PSA. So he had it in a 9.5 slab, sent it to PSA, or dropped it off with his submission at PSA, came back at 10. Now, in my personal opinion, I think this is probably more to, or it probably speaks more, I should say, to PSA's terrible grading process, their terrible QC process, rather than self-review issues, rather than conflicts of interest issues with their CEO getting special treatment. Only because I would find it incredibly strange that Nat Turner would post this on his personal account if he knew that there was something wrong with this card. Like, maybe there's still some things happening in the background where they do think it's Nat Turner's cards, and that's why, they've still graded it a 10, but on face value, I don't think that is what has gone wrong in this specific instance. I just think PSA have made a terrible mistake, which is in line with so many of the mistakes they've made in the past. One other thing I do want to flag on this situation as well is I did confirm again with Nat Turner today that people, when you submit a card, right, you as a customer, your name, it does not show up within the review process at all until it gets to shipping. You're assigned essentially a unique ID when your card goes into the process. That unique ID stays with your card throughout the whole process. That unique ID then gets mapped up to you when it goes to ship your card. So from that perspective, the graders technically shouldn't have known that it was Nat's cards. Whether that was true or not is another question. I just think, in my opinion, that this comes down to PSA being horrible with the volume of cards they're trying to deal with right now. Their QC sucks, their grading sucks, we know that. They've made so many mistakes. As I've said in so many videos over the last few months, I feel like it's been the last year now, where the mistakes they're making have increased, but not in proportion to the volume of cards they're also grading, right? I think their error rate has grown exponentially. They're making a lot more mistakes than they used to, and like I said, it's not grown in proportion with the number of cards they're grading. As I say all the time, I work in external audit, right? So I look at controls and review processes and all this sort of stuff at these kinds of companies all the time. And the one thing you learn pretty quickly in my line of work, right, is that when you've got strong controls, when you've got strong reviews in place, the volume doesn't really matter too much. Yes, it'll increase slightly, but a strong control environment, your reviews, so on and so forth, will make sure that mistakes don't happen no matter what kind of volume you're doing. Like, mistakes will always happen, but you know what I mean. They're not going to increase through the roof. And that is essentially what has occurred at PSA. I just think this is a shit show again from PSA, and it speaks to more issues out at PSA with regards to their review process, with regards to their grading process, more so than it does with regards to a conflict of interest for CEO getting favorable grades for his cards. And the reason why I think that is because I think it'd be very strange if this was an inside job or it was a known issue. Let's say the grader or the reviewer did see this piece missing, right? They didn't miss it. They would have told him, right, in that instance, if they were trying to cover it up or if they were just trying to cover his backside, right? Or at least I like to think they would. Because if you're going to do an inside job and try and manipulate the process, you want to do it all the way through. You're not going to not say anything and then make this guy look like an idiot when he posts it to his hundreds of thousands of followers, right? Or however many he has on Twitter. That would just be really, really dumb, right? So Nat has basically told me he's taken it down. He's looking into it. He doesn't have the cards in hand yet, or on hand, I should say. This could be something to do with the light, but I find that very odd. Yes, this photo looks quite blurry here. When it was shown on his Twitter page, it was clear. I'm not sure why it looks blurry in this instance. But again, it's just very strange. And you're seeing things here like graders when they're looking at your card, the average Joe, but when they're looking at the CEO's card, this is what they're doing. You know, I'm not saying that kind of thing isn't happening, but given that their process is saying, you know, things stay anonymous, and the fact that Nat posted this, I just think if they were going to do a dodgy and they're going to do a bad deed, they would have followed through on the whole thing, and they wouldn't have shown it in the first place, in my opinion, until it came time to getting sold. Unless they're that ignorant and that stupid, and that's the mistake they've made. Like, I think it's still very much plausible that if the grader maybe wanted to find out whose cards it was, or in some capacity they know what kind of cards Nat Turner has. Maybe they've followed him on Twitter, they're seeing all the things he's got, and the grader sees all the same cards come through in one submission for one person. They might be able to put two and two together, and maybe that's why they've got some bias towards it. I'm not saying that definitely has not happened, right, in any way, shape, or form. It's entirely possible that it has happened. I just think it speaks far more likely to PSA just being absolutely hopeless with regards to grading lately than it does anything else. They've been beyond shocking. You can't state that enough. You can't highlight that enough, right? They've been so shocking. Yes, they're pumping through a lot of cards. They're getting through hundreds, thousands, or millions of cards a week, I think it is at this point. Maybe it's a month, something along those lines, something crazy, right? They're doing crazy numbers. You know, for them to facilitate those numbers, you're going to make mistakes. It's just very disappointing to see, like I said, that these mistakes have just grown exponentially. This is a ridiculous mistake to make. How can you miss a piece of a card missing, right? It's not that hard to spot, right? People in 2 seconds, like I say all the time, all these mistakes that PSA have made recently, all these mistakes that BGS have made, all these mistakes that SGC have made, they get posted on the internet, and within like 5 minutes, you got people in the comments saying that's fake, that's the wrong serial number, what's going on here, that's patch swapped. You got people spotting this stuff immediately, and these graders can't do that when they've got these cards in hand, and you expect them to have them in hand for a long enough time for them to do an adequate review, right? But again, it probably goes to some of the things and rumors we've heard in recent weeks where we're told that these graders have quotas on their plate that they need to get through every single day. And as you guys know, if you do work in some form of supply chain management, or you do work in audit like I do myself, or you're looking at process management or optimization or something along those lines, you know that the second you apply a quota on somebody, they're going to do whatever they can to meet that quota, right? And that means, you know, your QC drops as a result, right? Because people are focused on trying to pump through as much as possible to meet their quota, as opposed to doing the job on hand correctly. And I just think this probably speaks volumes to that in this current instance. I think this is PSA dropping the ball once again. Their QC sucks. Their grading sucks at the moment for the most part. And I think that speaks more to that problem than the CEO getting favorable grades. And like I said a bit earlier, I'm not saying that stuff is definitely not happening, but I just think this is more to PSA being a poor grader than PSA trying to be manipulative and get their CEO good grades. Both could be true. I'm not saying it's definitely not. I just think that's my personal opinion in this current instance. So please, you know, share your thoughts down in the comments below. I felt there was a few other things I wanted to flag on this. I'm not sure if I did mention Retro Hoops Breaks did a really good video on it. Like he said at the end of his video, if this is a favorable grade towards their CEO, that's big problems for them as a company, right? That doesn't need to be highlighted, right? Because that's fairly self-explanatory. But he made a good point, whereas if they did in fact miss something this obvious on the card, you should stop sending your cards to PSA. And I think that's sort of irrelevant in the sense that they've been making these mistakes for months, for the last year. This is not new. So that shouldn't be the sole reason why this card should be the sole reason for you to stop grading with them. There's plenty of reasons why you should stop grading with them. I still think they are the best, and I've said since day one, all right, like I say this all the time, but I've said it since day one of the boom, right, the last 2.5 years, that, you know, PSA is still the one you want to send your cards to, because I still think if you give every grader 100,000 cards, PSA is still going to be the most consistent out of all of them. They're just doing really poor work right now because they're pumping through so much more cards than their competitors. But again, that's not an excuse, right? They need to be doing better. This is completely unacceptable. And they're sort of lucky that this has happened with their CEO, because if this happened to a customer, you know, I think they would have, like, I say lucky in the sense from their process getting improved, right? They're lucky that this happened and their CEO is going to notice it and force them to make changes, as opposed to this just going to another average customer who probably got slapped with a higher fee, because obviously the market value of the card exceeds what, you know, that grading fee would have been, and then it would have gone away. Right now, because it's happened to their CEO, they're going to have to fix it, or you like to think they do. I very much hope that Nat comes out and says, you know what, this is what happened. It's meant to be anonymous. They missed it. It was looked exactly the same in the BGS 9.5 slab. Maybe BGS also missed it. Maybe got damaged when they opened the slab. Maybe it's just a photo. Who knows? But we need some response from the guys. So I think that's all my thoughts on this situation. I know I just spoke for a long period of time, so I do apologize. I feel like I say that all the time. Please share your thoughts down in the comments below, and thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. Cheers.